Hey everybody, I just want to do a quick discussion on the presidency of James Monroe. A little bit of background information on him. He is from Virginia. He was the last veteran from the American Revolution to serve as president. During the American Revolution, he served under George Washington. He was involved in the Battle of Trenton. He was in the camp during the winter at Valley Forge. After the Americans won the Revolution, Thomas Jefferson kind of took him under his wing and taught him how to practice law, to be a lawyer. James Monroe also participated in the creation of the Constitution, though he ended up being an anti-federalist because he believed that the Constitution gave the federal government too much power. He also served as Secretary of State under James Madison. So he came into the presidency with a pretty large resume. He had the credentials to serve in the White House. So let's talk a little bit about his presidency. James Monroe was overwhelmingly elected president of the United States in 1816 and 1820. If you look at the election maps at the bottom of the page, you can see in 1816, the Federalist Party's nominee, Rufus King, only received 34 of the possible 217 electoral votes. So it's a pretty overwhelming victory. After the War of 1812 and in the election of 1816, we're starting to see the end of the Federalist Party. By 1820, when James Monroe runs for re-election, he goes unopposed. No one goes against him. This is the death of the Federalist Party. Is in this election of 1820 when no one ran against him. Monroe's presidency began during an era of increased nationalism. The Americans believed that they just won the War of 1812, especially after Andrew Jackson's victory at the Battle of New Orleans. There's this new sense of pride and loyalty for the country. And this era of increased nationalism is called the Era of Good Feelings, which lasted this 10-year span, 1815 to 1825. Even though it was the era of good feelings and you have this increased nationalism, there are some issues that arise that we will talk about as well. So even though we are starting to come together as a country, there's also separation beginning that will eventually lead into the Civil War, and we'll talk about that. All right, but James Monroe, as you can see, pretty overwhelmingly won both of his elections. Monroe and the Democratic Republicans in Congress promoted nationalism and American unity in three ways. So they looked to kind of build upon this new sense of pride and loyalty and like American first mentality that came out of the War of 1812. So the first way that they promoted nationalism and American unity and American first mentality is through the government. We see an increase in the power of the national government over states during Monroe's presidency. And this is mostly done through the Supreme Court. John Marshall, all the way from John Adams, is still the Chief Justice. And during his time as Chief Justice, the Supreme Court uses its power to strengthen the national government. And so we see two important court cases during Monroe's presidency that help to strengthen the power of the national government. One of these is Gibbons versus Ogden in 1824 that said, the federal Congress, not the states, have the power to regulate interstate commerce, trade between two or more states. During these court cases, we see the necessary and proper clause being implemented and supported, that yes, Congress has powers outside of what's listed in the Constitution. So we see an increase in the power of the national government thanks to John Marshall and the Supreme Court. Another thing that we see, another way that Monroe and Congress promoted nationalism, is through the economy. It was the encouragement of industry and transportation to link the North, the South, and the West. We're trying to unite as one country economically. And the person most responsible for this is Henry Clay from Kentucky. In 1816, Congressman Henry Clay proposed the American system to build a strong national economy, an economy that the North, the South, and the West were all connected in, that they all supported one another. And so Henry Clay had his American system had three parts. The first part, to create a second Bank of the United States. In 1811, the first Bank of the United States that was created under Alexander Hamilton, that charter expired, so there was no national bank. So Henry Clay felt that we needed it to kind of promote the economy, to create a common currency, and to get back on track financially in the United States. The second part of his American system was to create a protective tariff to encourage American industry and to grow American industry and to limit British manufactured goods. Because after the War of 1812, when America and Britain kind of started their relationship again, their trade partnership, British goods were coming in cheaper than American goods. So a protective tariff would make American goods equal to or cheaper than the British goods. So that's why Henry Clay wanted the protective tariff. And Henry Clay also encouraged the improvement of transportation with roads and canals. These are called internal improvements. And so he believed that if we build roads and we build canals, that we will be that the country would be better connected through the different regions, the North, the South, and the West. And so we see the construction of the National Road, the Erie Canal, and many other internal improvements were made during this time. And the third way that Monroe and the Democratic Republicans in Congress promoted nationalism and American unity was through foreign policy. They expanded America's borders and increased America's role in global affairs. So during, following the War of 1812 and through Monroe's presidency, we kind of see this boom period of states being admitted into the Union. We have Indiana, we have Illinois, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, all admitted into the Union as states. And so with this, we have some challenges. We have new borders. We have some conflicts with Native Americans in Florida attacking settlements in Georgia, and kind of this dispute for land still. And so one of the things that Monroe does is he sends John Quincy Adams, his Secretary of State to Spain to negotiate a treaty. And in 1819, the United States gained Florida from Spain with the Adams-Onis Treaty for $5 million. So the United States gained control of all of Spain. I mean, not all of Spain. The United States gained control of all of Florida in exchange for $5 million. All right, so now Florida is territory of the United States based on the Adams-Onis Treaty. Another foreign policy foreign policy of Monroe was that we see Latin American nations gain independence. Mexico gained independence from Spain. Belize, we see a lot of these Latin American countries gain their independence. And so the United States wanted to support these new governments and keep European countries from coming back and taking and colonizing Latin America. So in 1823, the Monroe Doctrine was kind of started. And the Monroe Doctrine, even though it's confusing, I know some of you struggled with the primary source. All the Monroe Doctrine says is European countries should not interfere with the Western Hemisphere. All right, that's North America and South America. European countries should stay out of the Western Hemisphere, and that the United States will protect the Western Hemisphere. And also it said that the United States would not interfere in European affairs. So as this kind of map shows you, it kind of draws a line. The United States will kind of handle the Western Hemisphere and let the Americas do their own, keep and protect each other, and then Europe and Asia and Africa, you guys do your thing. So that's what kind of the Monroe Doctrine was. It warned European nations that the United States would protect the Western Hemisphere and the United States would not interfere in European affairs. Kind of keeping with Washington's proclamation of neutrality. We don't want to be involved in European affairs. Don't be involved in ours. So even though this was called the era of good feelings and there was a time of nationalism, there was also growing problems between the North and the South. And this is known as sectionalism, when we kind of see these sections starting to break off and kind of these differences between the North and the South. And so one of the differences is slavery. And so in 1790, you see slavery in both the South and the North. By 1820, most northern states have outlawed or banned slavery. So look at the population in the South. As the South is expanding slavery, the North is outlawing it. So we see this big divide between northern states and southern states. And northern states and northerners and southerners disagreed over slavery, but they also disagreed over tariffs. Agriculture south, manufacturing north, tariffs benefited the North, and the role of government. These disagreements dominated politics from 1820 to 1860. So we are starting the road to the Civil War between the split with the North and the South and these major disagreements, these fundamental disagreements. And so when Missouri applied to become a U.S. state, Northerners did not want the Southern states to gain more power in the national government. If Missouri entered as a slave state, the South would gain 2 more senators from the North, and it would mess with the balance of power. So what do? That's when Henry Clay comes up with the Missouri Compromise, also known as the Compromise of 1820. Missouri became a slave state. Maine broke away from Massachusetts to become a free state, and they create this at latitude 36 degrees, 3630, this line. Any states north are free, any states south